Hello, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the How to Be Great podcast here live tonight on YouTube Live. Or if you are listening at another point or watching another point, you are very, very welcome as well. I'm Rob McNichol, and joining me to my virtual left, there he is. No, there he is over there. Is Showbiz Paul Benson. How you doing, Paul?
Hello, Rob. How you doing, mate? Hello, everyone listening and watching live or listening later or however you're getting involved with this podcast. Hello. I don't know. It's hard, isn't it? When you've got listeners and viewers and live and non-live, you never know how to address people. It's an absolute nightmare of tenses.
It's an absolute minefield, you might say. But yeah, you're all very welcome. Great to have you here. And do say hello if you're joining us, whether it's participating with the topic that we're talking about tonight, or just say hello and tell us that you're there. It's always nice to hear from you. This won't be quite so interaction-driven as the quiz is when we do the quiz on a Sunday night, because obviously that very, very much needs to have everybody coming in and out. But as far as tonight goes, yeah, well, it'd be lovely to see you and say hello and chime in as we go. But broadly speaking, we'll push on with our topic, which is a bit of a cracker tonight. It's one I've been looking forward to for a long time. We're talking individual tag team wrestling, if that doesn't sound too much of a contradiction in terms, but we will get there shortly. We have to address something from last week, of course. First of all, is that where the heck were you last week, letting me down? I had to draft in a mystery partner.
Well, what can I say, mate? You know, when you've got a talent like Chris Hatch, you need to let the guy off his leash now and again. You know, the world demanded Hatchamania, and I gave it to them. And I also might have been out with my wife having a meal. Either or.
All week. Yeah, well, Paul was unavailable. He was on assignment last week, so Chris Hatch stood in for me. But it was very, very appropriate, actually, that Chris made it, because he was our mystery partner in a week where we were talking mystery partners and mystery opponents. Chris and I came up with our top five, and then when it was over to everybody else to decide who the winner was from that top five. Before we get into that, Paul, because you're going to give us the answers, who won out in the end as being the best ever mystery partner / opponent, but you obviously watched back or listened back. I don't know how you did your catching up with the podcast last week. How did you feel about our top five? Would you have disagreed very much with what we came up with?
Do you know what? I wouldn't have gone a million miles away, actually. I think, well, you asked me, didn't I, before I listened, what you thought my top five were. And I think I would have agreed with the vast majority. So I'm just pulling up your top five now, because I can't recall. I can only recall four of the five, actually. So I'm just reminding myself. Okay, yeah, there it was. Yeah, I think the only one I didn't really consider the five was.
Yeah, I should explain to everybody that
SummerSlam.
Okay, yeah, cool.
No, go on. You go.
No, it's fine. I was gonna fill while you were looking it up, but you came in anyway. That's a nice mug you're drinking out of, Paul Benson. What was that?
It's my Undertaker mug. It is my WWE Euroshop Undertaker mug. Can you see that?
I like it very much. I would like to have one of those, and I believe that there'll be later on in the podcast. We may or may not have a bit of information, but stay tuned. Yes, back to this top five. Paul, for those of you that are not watching, for those of you that are just listening, Paul is doing some lovely modelling with a big mug, whereas I'm drinking cider out of a glass, which is my normal way of being. Anyway, this top five. Let us know what the voting was like.
Mate, it was unanimous. Really, well, there was two. There was literally only two of the five got any votes whatsoever. We had about 30 votes in total, which is a nice number, and they all went to either Hulk Hogan at the Bash of the Beach, which was top. Second was Ultimate Warrior at SummerSlam in 1988, and everything else got 0. Undertaker at Survivor Series got nothing.
Well, I agree. I mean, to be fair, if you listen to the podcast, for those of you that listened last week, you know, I was a little bit anti that going on. To me, Undertaker at Survivor Series 1990 is a little bit Stone Cold Steve Austin winning the King of the Ring. It's a huge, big point on the way mark of the career. But was it the biggest, surprise? Did it have that big impact? No one knew who he was. Do you know what I mean? It was perfectly booked, but it wasn't that, oh my God, Hogan just turned on Savage and Luger and Sting. Oh my God, Ultimate Warrior just won the title out of nowhere. It didn't have that big epic. That to me, so that was my reason for not pushing Undertaker. We allowed it in the top 5 in the end, but I kind of feel that it was about the right decision to not quite get too many votes. But I did expect Hogan to win. The reason that we did the podcast, particularly last week, because it was the anniversary of Hulk Hogan and the Bash at the Beach. And look at that! Upon my word, as I say that, we have a little comment in the chat from Rich Pemberton, Richie PP, who is one of certainly Great Britain's biggest Hulkamaniacs, if not the world. So what a lovely bit of timing.
There we go. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. He there was no other choice to win, really. It was a history making, industry changing mystery partner. So yeah, it's spot on. So you guys did well, and the audience did well in picking the winner of the 5.
Yes, well done, everybody. It's a young Mr. Grace situation from Are You Being Served? We've all done very well. Anyway, let's move on to this week's. What we're doing this week is we are talking about the best individual tag team wrestler. Because what we mean by that is not necessarily someone that wrestled. Sorry, there's more than one person in the chat telling us that we're the wrong way around again, Paul. People aren't happy with this Ant and Deck situations.
Well,
those of you that are watching on the YouTube will see that I am on the left and Paul is on the right, which is it's the wrong way around.
Give us a second. How's that, everyone?
Fixed it. There we go. Is everybody happy now? Hello, everyone. My name is Showbiz Paul Benson, and with me is that loser to my right and my left, Rob McNichol. Actually, we should say we do need to stipulate something for everybody that if you're wondering, not only were we the wrong way around on the video, just before we went on air, we actually had a wrestling match between the two of us, and it was a beard versus hair match, and it was a draw. So I've lost the whiskers and Paul's lost his barnet, and then we came on air to say hello to all of you. And I should also say, because I'm surprised Paul hasn't picked up on it already, I'll address it right now. The amount of times I give him stick for wearing American football jerseys and what else have you had on before? Ice hockey jerseys and stuff like that. Yeah. I have a T-shirt on it which says mine says Belgium Championship Football. So I'm it's a soccer shirt, but it's professing love for Belgium. Anyway, I put it for a World Cup a couple of years ago, in which I had Belgium to win the World Cup about 6 years ago. Anyway, let us move on to tonight's actual reason why we're here, which is the podcast. Best individual tag team wrestler. So what we mean by that is not Shawn Michaels because he ended up being one of the greatest wrestlers of all time and came from the Rockers. Not Bret Hart because he was in the Hart Foundation and went on to become the best there is, etc. Now, we might discuss those people. We're not ruling them out. But we're talking about the people who their expertise was as a tag team wrestler. Their legacy, you'll probably say, what was so-and-so good at? And you'll say, tag team wrestling. So it is an art. Yeah. It is something different. It's something that's come and gone and in different promotions. I mean, right now they're talking about AEW and saying, is the AEW tag team ranks as good a tag team ranks as we've seen in a very, very long time? They said the same thing in TNA about 10 years ago. There's lots of different companies that often see tag team wrestling as a bit of an art. And the further you go back in history, you'll see it in different territories. It comes and goes. It's come and gone in the WWE/WWF. Paul, I think it's going to be an interesting topic. I've got a massive long list that we need to rattle through. But before we start, your sort of take on the topic, as it were.
Yeah, so obviously it's another one where it's not the most obvious of topics to explain, but I think once you go into the weeds on it, it speaks for itself. So there's been so many good tag teams out there over the years, the usual suspects that we all talk about. There's also been loads of guys that have started off in tag teams and gone on to have single success. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels being the two most obvious examples, but there are tons. But are they the best? Were they the best in tag teams, or were they just happened to be the best wrestlers of all time that started in tag teams? There's a big difference. Tag teams I've got a big soft spot for tag team wrestling. In a lot of ways, I prefer it to singles wrestling, but it's an art form into itself, and you need to be of a certain ilk. You need a certain makeup, and some guys have done it in more than one team. Some guys have been a part of more than one excellent world-class all-time team. Some have been even better, but only in one team. And I suppose it's going to be really interesting as we get into it. What's more important, doing it, being an all elite team, Hall of Fame level team just once, or being excellent a couple of times with a couple of different partners, because there's examples of both that we're going to put up. And I just think it's a really interesting discussion. Like, there's a few, when I put the graphic up, I missed off a few that I wanted to discuss. I put a few in there that might prompt a few catcalls, and it got them. But there was a couple that you subsequently mentioned on the Twitter feed that I was like, oh yeah, I never thought of those guys.
Do you know what? I think this is one of the reasons why this is going to be very, very interesting. Is I've sort of come up with a bit of it's an unofficial top 6 or 7 that I've got in my mind. I often come in with a top 5 or 6 to pitch, and then you often come up with ideas, or last week Hatch had ideas, and then you talk about it and you go, oh, okay, and you change your mind. I would say my top 5 plus 2 or 3 other strong choices, none of them were on your graphic.
Interesting.
I don't have anyone on your graphic in my top 6 or 7. And that is not to say that the people that were on the graphic do not deserve to be in the conversation. They will all be in the conversation. But my instinct did not put any of those people on. I don't know whether you made the graphic in 2 minutes because you didn't have much time, whether they were the 8 pictures that you had closest to hand or easier to source, or whether they're the 8 people that you want to go with. But we'll talk about lots of people. We'll try to really, really rattle through, because we don't have a set time for the podcast, folks, but it's normally not far off of about 90 minutes. So that would be sort of our aim, sort of about an hour and a quarter, hour and a half. You do know us. Sometimes we go a bit longer. But that will our intention is, so if you're just joining us at the top of this show, roughly speaking, we would hope to be done by about 9 o'clock if you're joining us live. But once again, fire some comments in the chat. Just to mention a couple of ones that have already been mentioned in the chat. I've already seen... sorry, I'm going to have to do the finger on the screen thing here. But I've already seen Buff Bagwell be mentioned. I've already seen beautiful Bobby Eaton. I assume that Will Kitchen means. I've seen Edge mentioned. And I've also seen Raul Jimenez mentioned. He does play up front for Wolverhampton Wanderers as opposed to being a tag team wrestler. But I imagine he did Wolverhampton in front, according to Matt Barber. He's a great tag team with Diogo Jota. So
he wore. Do you remember he wore a custom Sin Cara mask? He's big mates with Sin Cara, and Sin Cara gave him a mask that he wore to celebrate a couple of times. So he's an honorary member of the Lucha House Party. Okay,
should we start with Sin Cara? Is he in our top 5?
He's not.
No.
I think Raul Jimenez has got a better chance.
The 1995 Royal Rumble is, I believe it was one of the heavenly bodies run into the ring, and Jerry Lawler says, "I like this guy," and Vince says, "You like him? Is he going to win the Royal Rumble?" He goes, "I don't like him that much." So that was a bit of one of those responses there for Sin Cara. The last thing I'll say before we get into some names individually, to follow on from what Paul said before, we don't really have a strict set of rules here on this one. We can take this chat however we want, but it's very much a case of the person proving their point. I think over a period of time is fair. Whether it's more than one team or just one team, that's a different matter. But you can say, wow, this guy in this tag team for that 3 months, amazing. You go, well, that's probably not going to be enough. You're going to have to prove this over a long period of time. But maybe there might be an argument for saying it's one person who was in one team and he carried that team. In fact, I'll tell you what, we'll start there. Because I think I've coupled a few together on my list I've got a list of about 30 names in front of me. Whether we'll get through all of them, I don't know. But the 3 that I've got that people have mentioned, because what we do, folks, is we put this out on Twitter and Facebook, and we want to get your mentions as well as just coming up with the ones ourselves, so where they can go into the topic. And I would say 3 that have been mentioned who I would associate with one team predominantly, but they have been put forward. In fact, I've got 4 of them. I would say people have mentioned Dynamite Kid. They've mentioned Scott Steiner. They've mentioned Ricky Morton, and they've mentioned Bubba Ray Dudley or Bully Ray, depending on your preference. 4 interesting names. Is it harsh on Davey Boy Smith, on Rick Steiner, on Robert Gibson, and on Devon Dudley that people have mentioned those other four? Does that mean those four are the stronger links? What do you think?
Well, I suppose you could look at that in a few. Take Dynamite Kid specifically. If you're going to pick one of the Bulldogs as a great tag team wrestler, it's not Dynamite, and that's not to say he's not a good one, but he did it in the Bulldogs and he was excellent. But I'd say the British Bulldog was just as good in that team, and then went on and did it with Owen Hart, arguably to an even greater degree down the line. So I would say that's a fair comparison between the two. My vote would go with Davey Boy every day in terms of greatness as a tag team wrestler there. But having said that, Dudley Boys are a great example. They're one of my favorite teams of all time. And of the two, I think Bully Ray is the better of the two. And I think he's proved that over time. However, I think it's where he's going to suffer, and teams like the Road Warriors, Legion of Doom, they're going to suffer in that the two are so intrinsically linked as a team. And the strength of that team didn't come from an individual. It came from the collective. It's probably another reason I wouldn't consider Shawn Michaels, because The Rock has fallen into the same bracket for me. I find it very difficult to pick one of those two to say they were the stronger in the team. And so Shawn Michaels didn't do it, but like I don't think you can pick one ahead of the other. And if they haven't then gone on to do it with another team, I don't think you can include one without the other, and therefore I don't think you can include either, frankly.
No, I think you might be right, and I think it might be one of the reasons we end up going towards people that have done it in multiple teams, because they've kind of proven that they can do it time and time again, being successful. And what I will also say is that perhaps a lot of the people that are going to come up here are the kind of people that you feel have got everything that should make a top star, except maybe either the X factor or maybe the vocal skills or the character.
Yeah.
You feel most of the people on my list are good wrestlers, solid, dependable, never let you down, can't see through them, but they're just lacking something. There's just a reason why they're not top tier world champ. Not many of mine have been world champ. Few of them have, but most of them are just that level down. And I think we're going to come on to a few of them as we go along. So I think that kind of lays the groundwork. But anyone else that you want to sort of bring up early doors, not to say I'm pushing out any of those suggestions, because, Ricky Morton, for example, man alive, like if you ever saw someone that epitomized what that person in the tag team should do, i.e. take the punishment, sell, tag in the other guy, Ricky Morton's your guy. But Ricky Morton is the Rock and Roll Express and the Rock and Roll Express only. And I think to pick Morton out would be very, very harsh on Gibson.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I think we should, there's probably going to be a lot of teams and wrestlers we jettison fairly early on. Like, Booker T is another great example of a great wrestler, but as a tag team, he was very much part of a unit. I'm repeating myself now, but I just think it's a reason why we'll probably jettison and burn through quite a few big names that you guys out there might think deserve a little bit more consideration because how good they are as individuals. But it might because their big success has been as an individual rather than a tag team, maybe they won't merit as much consideration. So Bret Hart, for instance, exceptional wrestler, Rob's favorite wrestler of all time. The Hart Foundation were a wonderful team, but if you were to list the top 10 career moments of Bret the Hitman Hart, I would probably suggest that 10 of those, or at the very least 9, probably 10 though, came as a singles wrestler.
Yeah, I think the only one you could argue is the Hart Foundation winning the titles. Is it SummerSlam?
SummerSlam 90. That's exactly what it's 90. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah. But without giving it too much thought, you could probably think of 10 more iconic, more exciting, more interesting moments as he was a single, because he had such a great career.
I think best Bret Hart moment is a podcast for another day on maybe next year's Canada Day / Bret's birthday. So in about 51 weeks' time, we'll do that as a podcast. You mentioned Booker T. Actually, I think Booker T I would have at a slight level above some of the ones we've already mentioned, because, again, I feel like Booker T's done it a few times. As in, obviously, Harlem Heat is the one you associate. But, you know, you can say Booker T and Scott Steiner were a good team in TNA. Booker T and Goldust was a lot of fun. There has
Booker
been
T
more
and
than
Goldust
one
were
Booker
fantastic.
T thing. Yeah.
Booker T and Goldust, I didn't even recall Booker T and Scott Steiner. I do recall Booker T and Rob Van Dam briefly, because that was always my team when I played SmackDown. Here Comes the Pain. I always put them together, but and then they manifested in real life. You know, you always remember silly things like that. But yeah, I just don't think Booker T and Goldust were great for a cup of coffee, but they didn't do anything long term. So again, it's not Booker T's not my guy in terms of tag teams. Whereas, you know, we could talk about them now or later if you like, but I think both Edge and Christian merit conversation. A, because they were such distinct individuals as part of that team, but B, they did other things as part of teams other times. So I think, let's do them now. Okay.
Who was it mentioned? Chris Higgins is in the chat. Chris said, Edge podcast over. He said 7 minutes into the podcast, we could have had an early night. But we are going to have to discuss other people. To me, if we go into this, and I love Christian, and I think, you know, Jay Riso is a great talent, a nice fella. But if we were doing, unless we put both of them in the top 5, I think it's Edge over Christian. I don't think there's a discussion on that. Not for their contributions to Edge and Christian, or Christian and Edge, as Howard Finkel always said, but I can't think of another Christian tag team. I don't mean a Christian tag team like, you know, Sting and Shawn Michaels. I mean Christian's tag team other than Christian and Edge. Like, I know he was with Jericho for a little bit, Tyson Tomko, there's a Christian coalition in TNA, but I don't think of Christian / someone else as a partnership. I only think of Edge and Christian. However, Edge, I mean, I've got written down here, Edge has won the tag team titles with Rey Mysterio, Chris Jericho, Christian, Hogan, Benoit, Orton. You know, a lot of different people that Edge has won the titles with. And this is not all about titles, folks. It's about how you are as a partnership. But that's a lot of people that you can name, and you can go into depth with. You know, Edge and Benoit is not like the greatest team of all time, but they were pretty good when they were together. The story of him wanting to team with Hogan because he was a whole Hulkamaniac, it worked. You know, him and Jericho as a group together worked, and then when they split up for a match itself, Orton, obviously, the rated RKO, and now like what that spawned this year. You know, there's a lot of depth to Edge, and added to the fact that he's in one of the greatest tag teams ever. If we were doing top 5 tag teams ever, blanket, Edge and Christian would be in the conversation. So I think the fact that he's in one of the greatest tag teams ever, and you can point to all the other ones he's been in and what he offers to those teams, he might end up being the best wrestler, as in the one that's experienced the most, been the world champion and so forth, that ends up in this list as far as I'm concerned.
Well, look, I wouldn't dismiss Christian so quickly.
Okay.
I think Christian did a lot of good stuff. Look, I'm going to jump ahead and say ultimately I do agree with you that Edge should be the one out of the two. But you know, not to discount Christian's effort, because he was in some good tag teams. He had you mentioned it, the one with Chris Jericho, which was a really good team. Did great work together. A snivelly heel team, kind of, you know, arguably quite similar to Edge and Christian, but they were together for a good long time and had a great arc. And then had a good breakup. I was about to say good feud to end it, but the feud wasn't brilliant. But the breakup was at WrestleMania 20. It didn't really go on beyond there very well. But the other one to mention is the team he had with Lance Storm, which was again a very good team. Again, I don't think it's quite enough to get in there, but I just didn't want to brush him under the carpet completely. Whereas Edge, I think you're absolutely right, is head and shoulders above. And I'll tell you why I think that is because I think Edge as a character and Edge as a wrestler is very malleable. I think Edge, because his character is what's the word I'm looking for? It's not so defined that it has to, like The Undertaker is a defined character, right? There's not that far you can go with Undertaker without making big shifts in character. Same with Hulk Hogan, same with Bret Hart, to an extent. Whereas Edge's character, after his initial sort of goth phase in his very early days and the whole vampire stuff, he was a guy, right? He was a guy that had different motivations at different points in his career, but he was a bloke who could be shifted and moved, and you could believe him changing personality and molding his personality to who he was with, and he did. you mentioned all those teams he was with. Christian, obviously, was by far the most successful, one of the best of all time. But then, I always remember his team with Rey Mysterio. It became sort of this earnest pair of good guys that were great wrestlers and who wanted to win the titles. They were very much the foils for the two heel teams, or the heel and the tweener team in that feud, where you had Los Guerreros and Angle and Benoit. But it really worked. And then again, you had the Hogan thing where he played second fiddle, I guess, to Hogan. He played the apprentice to Hogan's master. So that was another different way of doing things. And then when he was with Benoit, again, that was slightly different. He was the frustrated, jaded, angry partner that wasn't really into the team. He was just into success. And that was quite short-lived. I'm not sure. I don't think we're missing any significant teams that Edge has been in. I could be wrong, but the point is, Edge can do so much, and he can be so much. He can be a different foil to any different. Oh, sorry, I missed the Randy Orton team completely. There was the one in the back of mine. I missed. I didn't mention it. You caught it. Yeah, I know you did. Yeah. But the point is, he can be anything you want. You put him with anybody, and he can. Chris Jericho, who's tag team champion with Chris Jericho as well. Very, very, very briefly. But you can make Edge, or Edge can make himself be whatever he wants. Do he? Sorry, apologies. So I think Edge has to be absolutely in the conversation. What I would say with Edge is not just from a tag team perspective, but if you also think of, there's certain people. A good example is something we'll look into when we get to the weekend, and we have Drew versus Ziggler. When you see that, Ziggler's career is often defined by other people. Who's been around him and what it's needed. Some people need that person with them. And Edge, as far as Edge is concerned, it might be Christian, it might be Randy Orton or Jericho as like a team or a unit, but it also might be Lita, or it might be Vicky Guerrero, or Edge succeeds with people around him. Edge needs, and this is not to denigrate. I think Adam Copeland is an absolute, almost top tier performer of all time. He's a megastar and he deserves to be. I love him to pieces. He works well with other people around him. That doesn't work so well for an Austin or a Hogan or a Brett or a Cena. They don't need the other person with them, a manager, a sidekick, a valet, a wife. They don't. Absolutely.
Austin and Deborah. Like, just what? It just didn't work, did it? And it's like, some people just need to be their own person, and some people play their character off of others. And I think Edge is a great example for that. And that's when we get into our chat of tag team wrestling. Edge knows how to not only shine, but to allow the person that's with him, whether it's a tag partner or, a second, to shine. So as far as I'm concerned, Edge goes very strongly into the discussion for the top five. We often say
Agreed.
There's a bit of a gatekeeper position. Do you pencil them in as a number 5? He may end up being even higher than that, but I'm saying that you put some. So for everyone from now on, when we talk about them, do they get in above Edge? Are they Edge level? They've got to be this high, Adam Copeland high, to get into the top 5 reckoning. You kind of feel. I kind of have instigated everyone really so far. Let's fire me another name.
Okay. Let's stay with Canada and let's go. One interesting you said you wouldn't consider, but I think he's bang up there. Owen Hart.
Okay. Listen, I love Owen Hart. We talked in very glowing terms about him the other week in terms of we named him as our top pick for the King of the Ring, best ever King of the Ring, and you agreed as the public, you voted for him. So Paul and I clearly are Owen Hart fans. I loved Owen and Bulldog. Great team, great fun, and Owen really played off of that well. We talked last week about the surprise opponents or surprise partners about Yokozuna. The Owen Yoko thing was fun. I just never felt that either of those two things lasted a stupid long time, or it was never really on top. And I'm not going to talk about, high energy doesn't fit in there. Owen and Jarrett later on, but it kind of felt that it was lost in the shuffle of things. I think Owen Hart is definitely top 20, maybe top 10. Well, I wouldn't have him for top 5. I think there's going to end up being, I certainly wouldn't talk him down. I think you can talk in great terms. And Owen was definitely someone that benefited, the same as Edge, benefited for other people around him. Owen Hart was a tremendous wrestler. It was just a wonderful in-ring character, lacking a little bit on the mic. but just something, having people around him. If he'd have been around 10 years earlier, he would have had a manager, wouldn't he? He would have had a Bobby Heenan or a Slick or someone, or Jimmy Hart or someone with him. So I think it's a good choice.
He might have been a manager 10 years earlier.
Oh, and even 10 years later, had obviously it's a crying shame. Everything, we all know what happened to Owen, and it's a terrible thing that you think about all the time. But if it hadn't have happened and Owen was still with us, I'd like to think Owen would still be involved in some capacity. Owen would be a brilliant colour commentator. He'd be a brilliant manager. He'd be a brilliant host. He'd have a great podcast. Owen was someone just so great about everything he did. Owen would have been terrific, and obviously there's a huge loss to the world as well as to the wrestling industry. I just think in our topic today, I feel like I can fire you 5, 6, 7, 8 more names than Owen that get right to the top of this list. That's just my thought, but obviously you brought him up, so rebut me.
Well, I am going to try and make the case for Owen Hart. So you mentioned his early tag teams, and they weren't amazing, were they? There was High Energy, there was the New Foundation. But they were okay. High Energy did its thing. New Foundation was just neither here nor there. But High Energy had a very defined character. He was a high energy jobber babyface tag team. They did fine, but that was all. It was later on, obviously, that Owen became a thing. And when we talk, and we said at the start of this podcast that some of the best tag team wrestlers are maybe guys that have got 90% of the intangibles they need to be a credible main eventer. Just missing that little something maybe. And I think Owen Hart is exactly that. I think Owen Hart was a guy who was superb, but add someone else to him who gives him a missing ingredient, one of his missing ingredients, and he goes through the stratosphere. And it's almost like, I think that's a really good way to look at it. Who can be added to make them megastars that they can't be on their own. And Owen Hart is right up there with me. So you've got the Yokozuna tag team that shouldn't have worked, right? That tag team was put together to get Yokozuna on the card, back in the mix, but it worked. There were, basically Owen, snivelly little Owen, hiding behind his big, massive mate. Okay. Then you've got the British Bulldog team, which was one of my favorite teams of all time. Just what needs to be said about the chemistry that those guys had and the great matches they put together. It was just phenomenal. And then there's the Jarrett team, which you dismissed as lost in the shuffle, but I completely disagree. They were, was it 98, 99? That's it. It was right up till, it was 98, 99. They were superb. They were a brilliant heel mid-card to upper mid-card team. They were like, they were like Edge and Christian's dads. Do you know what I mean? They were just a slightly old school Edge and Christian. I just thought they were absolutely brilliant. They were the highlight of a program every week. They were entertaining. They were great wrestlers. They were great characters. They meshed well. They had natural chemistry. I think Owen was just made for tag teams, or like you said earlier, made for having that foil to bounce off, like Jim Neidhart was for a little bit in '94 as well with him. But I think he's sensational, and he's been a part of 2 excellent tag teams, and one really good one. Is he as good as Edge? Yeah, maybe not. But I think for me, you'd have to convince me to knock him out of that top 5. I'm not saying you won't convince me, but you'd have to make a case.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Listen, I liked Edge and Jarrett. It's just Edge and Jarrett, Owen and Jarrett. I just think for me, I'm happily be corrected, because that couple of years is an era where I'm not as sharp on as I could be. But it feels to me that it just didn't last very long. And it feels like there's other teams that you can talk about for years and years and years and years, either falling out and coming back together or whatever. To me, Owen and Jarrett is so short-lived. Great stuff, lightning in a bottle, but short-lived. And that to me holds it back a wee bit. Yeah. But
that's fine. Absolutely fine.
Owen goes in the chat. I think Edge and Owen are the 2 so far that go in there. Let's burn through a few other names because I don't think they're going to reach the 5. But let's see if you stop me on any and you disagree. These are ones that have been mentioned by people, so apologies if I'm not name checking everybody. But ones that have already been mentioned that I've seen either in the chat or in the on the Facebook post on Twitter, I'm going to say that have been mentioned: Randy Orton, Batista, both Hardys, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, The Big Show, John Morrison, Ron Simmons. There are a whole bunch that have been mentioned. Some of them are on your graphic, others that have been mentioned by other people. I'm going to up front say, to me, none of them reach the criteria. Again, not suggesting that any of them are bad choices. We could come up with 50 that are good choices. Our job is to do the top 5. And to me, none of those get to the top 5. Do you have any that you would like to pick me up on?
Two, really. One that I'd like to make a strong case for, and one that I'd like to make a less strong case for. Ron Simmons, is the lesser of the case. Okay, Ron Simmons, he's a funny guy, really, isn't he? Because he's a really celebrated wrestler, and has had some really high moments. But as a singles, he had that run with the WCW Championship. But as a singles, that's it. And it's funny to say, yeah, he won the title and that's it. But beyond that, he was pushed into that main event slot at a time when WCW needed a main eventer. And it didn't hurt them to have a black main eventer, given all that was going on at the time internally.
Listen, I don't want to get into a racial discussion. That puts us on very, very thin ice. And I'm also not comparing these two individuals as wrestlers, as people, as whatever. But in some ways, when you study the WCW history and you talk about what the decision was made, in some ways, Ron Simmons as WCW champion is the Jinder Mahal of his era. He was suddenly pushed. He was suddenly pushed to champion. He lost it and he went straight back down again. He didn't hang around in the top level. It didn't elevate him. He got given the belt. He lost the belt. He went back down again. That was all that happened. Bill Watts made him the champion. Bill Watts had great success with Junkyard Dog in a more regional level, and he saw dollar signs in the black champion, and that's what Bill Watts went with. Again, it's hard. It's always a bit thorny to do a bit of a chat about a racial issue, but I really do think if Ron Simmons was a white guy, he would not have won the title at that stage. That was the decision that was made. But to your point, we're talking about tag wrestling, and I think when you say certainly, Doom were a better team than people remember. APA, certainly. There's some good tag teams that he was involved with.
Well, that's my point. He was involved with 2 excellent teams, but neither team you would call all-time great. But obviously, we all know about how good APA were. The APA, or the Acolytes morphing into the APA, were absolute staples of the Attitude Era. If they were the guys that the Edges and the Hardys, the Edge and Christians and the Hardy Boys and whatever needed to sort of bounce off. They were the Kane in the Money in the Bank match, weren't they? Because you needed that team to be grounded arse kickers to effectively let the other guys show what they can do. And they got beyond that. They became the APA, and they had such a great aura about them and real good characters, and they really stood the test of time. And I think they were wonderful. As were Doom. Doom were really, really good in a different era. Doom were, your old school Demolition, Legion of Doom style, big ass kicking, masked at first and then subsequently unmasked, badasses. And I am a mark for big ass kicking, badass tag teams. And Doom were one of the best. So I having said all that, I love Ron Simmons and I love his 2 teams. I don't think he can be in the top 5 because I think, again, the teams were too reliant on the chemistry of the 2. I don't think Ron Simmons could have replicated that without the chemistry with his partner. So I'm taking him out of the equation. The other one I would make a stronger case for is Eddie Guerrero.
Okay.
Again, for 2 teams, Los Guerreros was so good. And again, maybe forgotten, maybe a little bit underappreciated just because of how beloved Eddie is as a singles guy. But that run with Chavo, my God, that whole lie, cheat, and steal persona really came from that run with Chavo. And that's where the Eddie Guerrero character we know and love really became honed. It's not where it started, but it was where he really nailed it to where he got to that main event spot. And they were a wonderful, wonderful tag team as heels or babyfaces. They were fantastic. He also had that team with Rey Mysterio that was equally as good. But the one that people can easily forget about is his tag team with Art Barr.
Good point. Really good point.
You know, how many guys have you heard over the years? Guys that know way, 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 way more than us about what makes a good wrestler. I'm talking Chris Jericho. I'm talking Bruce Pritchard. I'm talking loads of guys who cite Art Barr and Eddie Guerrero as their favorite tag team of all time.
Good point.
They were exceptional. And I think between and I can't forgive me, I can't remember the bloody name of their team together. If anyone in the comments can remind me. Los Gringos Locos. Yeah, there we go. And I see now Will's already said it. And I think they were so good and so distinctive as personalities. And then Eddie went and transplanted that to another great team later on, and a couple of other alliances. Like I said, there was Rey Mysterio, there was Chris Benoit at times as well. And I think Eddie Guerrero was such a massive part of those excellent, excellent teams that he needs to be in the conversation.
Okay, with your permission, I'm just going to type these down now so I don't forget towards the end. So I am typing down Owen, Eddie, Edge, I think is so far. Fair point on Simmons. I agree on everything you said on Simmons. Certainly wasn't one we should have skirted over so quickly. But I think ultimately we're going to find enough that are better. Let me see. I'm just checking. Is there any other ones that we can do in short form? I don't think so, really. So if we have missed over any, and there was one that was said in the chat while we were doing that. Who was it? What was it? What someone said? Let me just see. Francis said Dilo Brown was another one. A similar sort of thing. Absolutely worth a comment. Okay, good, but there's going to be many that are better and stand out over a long period of time. Right, I'm going to go to another one that's on your graphic, as it were. Certainly someone that's won it with a few different people. Certainly someone you could argue was he one of those intangibles that for a long time anyway that didn't quite get to the top, and then maybe WrestleMania 35 changed that a little bit. Let's talk about Kofi Kingston.
Let's talk about Kofi Kingston, and I'm going to say something now that it's an opinion I've only come to. And I've never even voiced this to you. It's an opinion I've only really ever come to in the last couple of months. The New Day, the greatest tag team of all time. Right?
Whoa.
The greatest tag team.
Whoa.
The New Day are the greatest tag team.
I'm gonna disagree with you straight off the bat, but I'm gonna say, do you mean tag team or do you mean faction? Or do you mean a little bit of both?
The New Day,
because I think I don't know who the New Day tag team is. Is it Kofi and Big E, or is it Kofi and Creed? Listen to me, Xavier Woods, or is it Woods and Big E? To me, you can't pick two of them. Therefore, they become a faction. If you said to me they're the greatest faction of all time, I'm not going to disagree with that.
Well, what about the Freebirds? You know, the Freebirds were a tag team. It's great. I'll grant you it's a grey area. That's for sure. But anyway, my point is, take it as a given. You know, that's my opinion. They're the best tag. We can save the discussion on faction tag team properly for another, because it is a worthwhile discussion, but not for now. Kofi and what I love about the New Day is that they're all so distinct. Again, you know, I keep coming back to this theme, but they are all distinct personalities, but they are personalities that work exactly in sync as a whole. You take any one of those personalities out of that group and the group falls apart.
Spot on.
So you and all three of them can claim probably equal credit for that. But Kofi Kingston has proven beyond that team that he has got similar credit, similar chemistry with a range of different partners, from Evan Bourne to CM Punk. Am I missing any obvious ones, Rob?
R-Truth.
R-Truth, yeah. And I just think Kofi Kingston, again, I keep going back to it. Kofi Kingston is a 90%er. Call him a B-plus player if you want, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as a guy that is exceptional, but missing that one little thing that might get him over the top, whatever it might be. But Kofi Kingston, fully deserves his position as one part of the greatest tag team ever. He's done it over a number of years in a number of different teams, in a number of different styles, face and heel. I just think he's exceptional, and I think he is exactly where he needs to be. Like, the singles run, and I'd like to do, I'd love to do another proper discussion with you on this, because I think that singles run he had to the main event of WrestleMania was one of the greatest stories that WWE have told in the last decade. But the key point of that was it wasn't Kofi Kingston's story; it was the New Day's story. Okay. And the story was he couldn't have got there without his. The whole point was they were a team and they got there together, and Kofi was the totem of that team, but he couldn't have done it without his friends. And that made the unit stronger. It wasn't a Kofi Kingston singles push. It was a New Day story. And to me, that makes it, the fact that he was the focal point of that makes an even stronger case for this. So you can tell I'm really passionate about Kofi Kingston.
You can. You're only one step away. You're only one step away from launching into "What would I do if I sang out of key? Would you stand up and walk out on me?"
I just think they've made such a great, and they've broken down barriers as well. Together they've done so much to just change the face of tag team wrestling and everything. And they've been such an influential act. They've never had any dissension. They've been together for 5 years without one iota of tension in those 5 years, and that is unheard of, because they are a unit and they're a solid unit. And Kofi is such a big part of that. So I think they're going to go down as the best team of all time when all's said and done. And I think Kofi Kingston is one of the greatest tag team wrestlers of all time. He's got the comeback as well. He's the Ricky Morton. He's what a great babyface in peril that guy is.
I was just going to say, it's not the comeback. It's the peril. It's the jeopardy that he does particularly well. Which I think is one of the reasons why that actually, funnily enough, if you were to say, name me the best team, the best two out of three in terms of a team for the New Day, I would say the best team is either Big E and Kofi or it's Big E and Woods. I'd say it's Big E. I'd say it's Big E and Kofi. And I'm a huge Xavier Woods fan, by the way, but I'm saying that Big E is the linchpin of the team. He needs one of the other two, mainly because of the roles they fill. It's a little bit like being two central defenders. One attacks the ball and one can play the ball or whatever. And it's I think you've made a very impassioned case for Kofi. He was quite a long way down my list before this started. Not a long way in my top 10, but not my top 5. You've made a good case. You've made a really, really good case. I'm certainly going to pencil it. Oh, I already have. I'm just going to write his name in, and I've already done it.
But just to really quickly on your point, I think you're. I think I agree with you completely. I think the team, the best team, the best combination, having all the guys in the roles that they're best at is exactly that. Kofi and Big E, and then Xavier Woods as the manager, as it were, on the outside. I think that is using them all to the best strengths. But you can pick and choose. They're excellent, whichever combo.
I tell you what, let's go to the Freebirds. Okay, let's use that as the bridge to the Freebirds. Because if you're looking at the three in tandem, they all work together. And I'm talking original Freebirds here. I'm not talking Jimmy Garvin era, although I love Jimmy Garvin. I'm talking the original Freebirds. Essentially, Kofi is Buddy Roberts. Xavier Woods is Michael Hayes. And Big E is Terry Gordy. If that's essentially how the dynamic works, where you can't take one of them away and they all work together. I am very strongly proposing for this top 5. I want to say Terry Gordy. I think Terry Gordy is, if you watch the matches, Buddy Roberts workhorse, Kofi Kingston workhorse of the Freebirds. But Terry Gordy was the muscle. He was the one that backed up big mouth Michael Hayes, little toady Buddy Roberts with his headpiece on. Terry Gordy, legit, mad, tough guy. Held that team together. He was the absolute linchpin of the Freebirds. Then there's the WCW team with Steve Williams. Quite short-lived, but in an era where early WCW, maybe it was still even NWA then, but they were really going for a bit of legitimacy. Terry Gordy and Steve Williams, what a team when they came in together. And they just looked like everyone else before them had been children. And then they came in and they were men. And they looked tough and they looked real. Wouldn't have worked in WWE. Wouldn't have worked against
No,
the killer bees and all these
the bushwhackers and stuff. Yeah,
bushwhackers, nasty boys wouldn't have worked, right? It had to be the real, so they were having matches against the members of the varsity club or stuff like that. And it was fabulous stuff, real realism, gritty. JR on the call, doing it as if it was real. And then not only has Terry Gordy got that, not only has he got the Freebirds, and by the way, I'm skirting over the Freebirds. The Freebirds changed the world. Not just the music, but just the way they were. They were going from territory to territory. They blew up world class. The Freebirds changed wrestling. And then you've got Terry Gordy in Japan with Stan Hansen. And to this day, Terry Gordy and Stan Hansen are... You think about what the Road Warriors or the Steiners or anyone like that might be considered in North America. Terry Gordy and Stan Hansen ruled Japan. They were big, they were brash, they were the Gaijins, but they were it. And we have to do worldwide stuff on this, folks. It is not WWF only. So as far as WWF is concerned, Terry Gordy was there for a cup of coffee in the late 80s and then was the executioner later on. Whatever. Yeah. But as far as WCW is concerned, as far as World Class Championship Wrestling is concerned, as far as All Japan Pro Wrestling is concerned, Terry Gordy is absolutely on the top of this list, almost without peer. To be fair, I think if we put a 5 up in the vote, I don't think he'll get many votes. But to me, as a representative, I mean, I've got 3 or 4 others I'm going to be strong for as well, but I'm really strong for Terry Gordy.
Well, I did not have him on my list when I came in. I've got a list of about 15. He wasn't on there. That's my error, because everything you said is absolutely right. Never even crossed my mind to put him on there. There's not much more to add to what you said. He was superb. I think especially his New Japan stuff, frankly. Where I rate that higher than the Freebird stuff. Yeah, he was, the stardom level that those guys had in Japan through the work that they did in the ring was just unparalleled for foreigners, certainly at that point. And it was because of who they were. So yeah, look, let's see how it shakes out. But I'm more than happy to have him in the conversation for the 5.
I think you empowered me a little bit by mentioning Eddie and Art Bar. Los Gringos Locos. It was, to me, that was the fact that we can do things on different, not just different countries, but different continents. I think is a strong shout for Gordy. Just to mention a couple of people. Brilliant. Thank you so much for everyone that's commenting. By the way, it's hard for us in this context, different to the quiz night that we have on a Sunday, to get into some of the questions or the comments that are coming through. But the couple of things that I will address, I think both of these comments might have come from Graham Daly. Who has mentioned, what about the New Age Outlaws? What about the Von Erichs? I think we might come to at least one of the Outlaws in due course. I'll certainly bring him up. But the Von Erichs, someone else mentioned the Outsiders earlier on. Forget who that was. Sorry about that. But a few people have mentioned teams. It was Mick Connolly, I do beg your pardon. They've mentioned teams that have been mentioned. We're very much going towards the individual. Some of you guys might not have been here right from the very, very start of the pod when we sort of outlined this. In terms of great teams, of course, the Von Erichs as a group, amazing. Of course, the Outsiders, revolutionary in WCW. But can you push one above the other? Have they done it with lots of other teams? I can't tell you too many other Kevin Nash or Scott Hall teams. So I think that's the reasons why they might not get mentioned. A few others that you're saying, what about so-and-so? What about so-and-so? Trust me, folks, we will get to everybody. But since... so am I okay to put Gordy on the shortlist? You're happy with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
The slightly long shortlist. I've got 5 so far. I think we could add another 4 or 5 to it. But I have one other that's from the past. It's from a bit of a bygone era that we probably wouldn't have seen the best of. I'm not really pushing him for the 5, but I want to make sure he's mentioned because sometimes we can be a bit modern biased, partly because of our age, partly because of... I kind of feel, when people do a bit of a in the Premier League era of football,
yes,
forget that football existed pre-1992. We do it a little bit with wrestling, and I always feel like it's the WrestleMania era kind of like dominates the chat. Wrestling kind of was invented in 1985, and you talk about the wrestling era, the WrestleMania era. One from before then, I've never really seen enough of him to judge. he won't end up on our list because I don't think any of us were able to do so. But Ray Stevens, anyone I ever talk to about Ray Stevens says that he was an unbelievable wrestler in the 60s and 70s as a singles as much as anything. But I've got three people: Ray Stevens and Pat Patterson, Ray Stevens and Nick Botwinkle, Ray Stevens and Jimmy Snooker. In the Territory era, absolute premier mega tag teams. I haven't seen enough of them, but everything I've read about, like I say, I don't think it'll end up in our list, but I really want to make a point of saying that from what I know, Ray Stevens probably ought to be in this list.
You're probably right. I don't know enough about Ray Stevens to make the argument, and that's again like me missing Terry Gordy. That's on me. I read Pat Patton's book a few years ago, and he can't say enough about Ray Stevens. And if Pat Patterson thinks he's a great tag team wrestler, then who are we to argue? But yeah, you're right. I think unfortunately we have to be honest about our knowledge and our lack of knowledge from those sort of regional pre-WrestleMania eras, and say, love to discuss it further and love to know more, but there's only so many hours in the day, and how could you argue Ray Stevens over anyone on that list when we know so much about that list and
exactly
little about Ray Stevens? We just couldn't have a credible. We'd be putting him on their own reputation.
It's a little bit like saying that Stanley Matthews is a better footballer than Zinedine Zidane. Well, we don't know, do we? So what I want to make sure we do is there are certain people that you can go back and access. You can see Terry Gordy. You can go on the network. You can go on YouTube. You can find Terry Gordy stuff. You can't really find Ray Stevens stuff. So
not as much, no.
For any older viewers, older listeners, we do apologise. That would be someone that I would imagine if we were having a discussion over all the eras that he'd probably be in there. Unfortunately, it is not our fault, Paul, that you and I are in our, let's say, mid-30s and be charitable.
Let's.
But there we are. I think you're due one. Give us a shout.
Okay, I will. And I'm going to go to one that you mentioned on your list that I didn't initially think of, but is such a great shout. Cesaro.
Yes, absolutely.
Cesaro, what a shout. I'll let you have the floor on this one, mate, because it was your suggestion. But
I think Cesaro might have the record of having the most successes. Like a lot of people that we'll mention have had lots of tag team reigns, but short-term ones. Some might have two fabulous teams that deserve being the chat being about. But Cesaro might have the most, a year with a couple of people, but just so solidly knocking it out of the park. 8 out of 10 as a tag team. I've got 5 teams written down for Cesaro. And certainly 2 of them I consider very highly, and 3 of them pretty highly. I'm going to say, most recently, it didn't really pan out, but the teaming of Cesaro and Nakamura, had potential, didn't go anywhere.
What? You say, mate, no, I'll stop you there, mate. It's barely even begun. They are, they'll be taking the tag team championships off the New Day, Extreme Rules. I'm sure of it. Yeah, no, that's just a reboot.
Okay,
watch this space.
They've come back to it then. Cesaro and Jack Swagger. The Americans worked.
Good.
Cesaro and Tyson Kidd, great stuff.
Splendid.
Loads of fun. Cesaro and Sheamus, the bar. What a great
incredible team.
Talk about the natural fit of 2 guys that are obviously great mates in real life. And do you remember you had a whole bunch of teams that sort of just felt like lumbering big guys that didn't really work back in the day? Your Powers of Pain. Your teams like that felt on the should have been great, and then when you watched them, went, oh, that was a bit. But Sheamus and Cesaro, workers, felt like a team. Beautiful, organic way of getting into the team. And then my favourite of all of them, Claudio Castagnoli and Chris Hero, the kings of wrestling in Ring of Honor, the best team in Ring of Honor. And I talked about eras of tag team wrestling, how AEW right now, TNA 10 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, maybe a little bit more. The Ring of Honor tag team scene was incredible. Kings of Wrestling, Briscoes, plenty of others, Daniels and Kazarian, lots of others. But the Kings of Wrestling, K-O-W, Kings. Just, and Mick Connolly said it almost as I've said it, the number one, Kings of Wrestling. I think Cesaro is the ultimate tag team wrestler for what we were talking about. There is he's not quite got there, has he? Vince might think it's because he's from Switzerland. Others might say it's for other different reasons, but he is your man. There is no real reason why Antonio Cesaro, Claudio Castagnoli has not been the biggest star in wrestling for the last 10 years, because he's as good in the ring as anybody. He's as likable as anybody. He's believable as anybody. But there's something not quite there. But when he has to go with someone else, who doesn't love Cesaro?
Wow. Quite. I don't think there is a missing ingredient with Cesaro personally. I think he's got absolutely everything. But that's another topic for another time. Fully agree with everything he said. The beauty of Cesaro is that what we said about some of the others about needing those other guys to mesh with to be superb, I don't think that's the case with Cesaro. I think he can make something work with just about anybody. You put Cesaro with someone and Cesaro just makes the whole package work wonderfully. Cesaro and Tyson Kidd are probably my favorite ever tag team that never quite got over the hill. They were just such a great combination, the pair of them, in terms of style and in-ring and personality. And like you say, the Kings of Wrestling were wonderful. The Bar is my favorite of his teams. I think they were just so good together. Powerhouses with personality and chemistry and charisma, that made themselves stand out, I guess, by their style and by how they acted. And they could have been together. They could have been a team that were together for 10 years, and it wouldn't have got old. It's just such a shame that they broke up.
Here's the thing: how often have you had two individual people? Like, for example, it was the Rockers, then it was Marty and Sean. It was the Hart Foundation, then it was Brett and Anvil, right? You have a team, they break up. Sometimes you have two people that come together and make a reasonable team, and that's it. How often do you get a team of two really well-known individuals, and then you team them, and they become the team? They become the Bar. Not Sheamus and Cesaro. They become the Bar. Like, do you know what I mean? And they felt like a team. They didn't, like, because even other people that have done really well together, you still say Owen and the Bulldog. They didn't have a name.
Yeah.
You say Miz and Morrison. You don't say, you just say who they are. They're the two individual names. But they became the Bar. They felt like as much of a team as, the Nasty Boys or the Killer Bees or the Beverly Brothers or whatever. They just felt like the unit. Do you know what I mean? That doesn't happen very often.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think I think you put, like I said earlier, I think you can put him with anyone. You look at that SmackDown roster or that Raw roster, and you decide you want to put Cesaro with them as a team. Give it a few weeks, and they'll be an exceptional team, because Cesaro is an exceptional wrestler, and I cannot fathom why he is not the biggest star in wrestling, because
I'm sort of
even the accent is an advantage with him. It's not like he struggles with his English. He speaks perfect English, but the accent is cool. The accent isn't a barrier. The accent is an accessory. There's obviously a reason that none of us are privy to, and I'm sure it's not just a case of Vince doesn't like him. It's never that case, is it? There's always something that we don't know about that really stops the guys getting to the top. But on the surface, my God, the biggest star that never was. He's got everything: size, look, ability, charisma. My wife's home. See, even she likes Cesaro. Yeah, just first class.
Absolutely. I'm going to mention one more that was there that came from the room, as it were. It's not one I necessarily have on my list, but because he was mentioned, because the person that mentioned it is a huge hooked-on supporter, I want to back Matt Barber and offer up Marcus Bagwell, and just say, like, in terms of, he's not going to reach our top 5, but I want to make sure he gets more than just a passing reference. It's because actually there are a hell of a lot of teams that Marcus Bagwell was part of, all mid-card, and none of them that really do the business. But is he slightly underrated, Marcus, old buff?
No.
But he's a multi-time multi-time tag champion with the Patriot, with Too Cold Scorpio, Scotty Riggs, Shane Douglas, Scott Norton, Lex Luger. Wasn't necessarily champs with all those, but had teams with all those. He falls into that bracket of the WCW era of he looks like he should be the guy. He looks like he should be bigger, but we can't quite get him there. So we bring him back down and we team him with someone, and it kind of works. I feel like he's almost like he's the blueprint, but he's a bungalow and not a penthouse. Do you know what I mean? It kind of, there's he is the discussion that we're having, except we can find lots of people that have done it better. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but like, I don't think that Marcus Bagwell or Buff Bagwell ever brought anything to really any teams, with the exception of him and Scott Steiner, maybe, that somebody else couldn't have brought. Certainly those early teams with Scotty Riggs and Too Cold Scorpio. Yeah, whatever, just stick any other pretty boy in there with big muscles. I don't think it really made a difference. It's a slight improvement when he became Buff Bagwell, but I think it just, it's the argument of quantity over quality, isn't it? And he had lots of teams that were okay, but he never had a single team that was exceptional. How many of his teams are better than any? You tell me one of Buff Bagwell's teams that's better than Cesaro's worst team.
No. None.
Then that's the end of the conversation.
No, but as someone that I think falls into our bracket, I just thought he was worth a mention.
He's definitely worth a mention.
Yeah, and that's all.
Definitely worth a mention, and worth dismissing. Yeah.
Right. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 really that I want to I've got left to discuss. 5 with a subsidiary 6th, because you can't talk about one without the other. Let's throw up for the next one. And certainly in terms of talking about sort of like your linchpin, and you put someone with them, multi-time tag champion Kane.
Ooh. Very interesting shout. Very interesting shout. Kane. Right, you've knocked me a bit off guard there, but okay, you're right. Kane was.
While you're getting your guard, I'll tell you that Kane has been champion, and this is sometimes being a good tag team is more than about being just the champion. But Kane has been champion with Mankind, with X-Pac, with Undertaker, with the Hurricane, with the Big Show, with Rob Van Dam, with Daniel Bryan. That's a lot of different partners. And tell me any of those that aren't successful. I don't really consider Kane and Mankind a team. They were two people that were together at the right sort of time and won the title belts. I don't feel like they're a team. But the Brothers of Destruction are a team. Him and RVD were a team. Yeah. Him and Big Show were definitely a team. Him and X-Pac, the whole story around that. And then Team Hell, no. The launch pad for Daniel Bryan. Yep. I almost feel like Kane is not the second best necessarily, but he's the other guy in lots of teams. Like, who do you most want to watch wrestle? Kane or Daniel Bryan? Well, it's Daniel Bryan. Kane or The Undertaker? It's The Undertaker. Kane or RVD? It's RVD. Kane or Mankind? Probably Mick. Like, Kane's the other guy in lots of teams, but man alive, he's a good other guy in lots of teams.
Every good combo in entertainment needs a straight man, and Kane might be the best straight man of all time, because like you listed out all those. And did you mention the Hurricane? You mentioned it when you listed the champions, but even that team with the Hurricane was fantastic fun for the period that it was. And he was, without him and without him to bounce off, those teams don't work, because Kane always knew how to sort of just give enough, just change his character that bit to allow the other personality to absorb. And I'm sound really wanky now, to be perfectly honest.
No,
I'm probably overthinking it, but I think Kane is massively in with a shout at the top 5, because of, not just the number, but the range of different types of teams you have. What the hell have the Brothers of Destruction got in common with Team Hell No? Absolutely nothing, apart from them being quality. The first one obviously was the story with with X-Pac, which was just a wonderful example of, it was probably the best odd couple tag team of all time. At that point, I'm sure there's been a few that have beaten it since arguably Kane and Daniel Bryan being the best. And there you go. And that that's another string to his bow. He's the king of the odd couple tag team because he's such an odd part of any couple.
What a fabulous description.
Right there, mate.
Jordan Skinner in the chat has just described Kane as the digestive biscuit of wrestling. That is a fabulous description. I hereby commission for the hookedonwrestling.co.uk website. I'm not going to write it. Someone else can do it. But I want wrestlers as biscuits.
I'll do it.
Absolutely brilliant. Wrestlers as biscuits and Kane as the digestive is where we start. What I would say about Kane and his teams, Kane is not necessarily the main man in all of his teams, but if you flip it and talk about his partners, what's the best team that Daniel Bryan's ever been in? The one with Kane.
Team Hell No.
What's the best tag team that Big Show's ever been in? I'd say it's the one with Kane. Jericho, but it could be the one with Team. What's the best one that RVD's been in? What's the best one that Undertaker's been in? Their best teams, and I'm talking teams, not best wrestler they have teamed with, but best teams, it's Kane. It's where he fits in. It's a great role for him. He is right in this conversation. Are you happy with me writing Kane into our long shortlist?
100%.
The shortlist is now 7, and we've got a few people to talk about there. In the chat, Mick Conley says Kane is like Billy Gunn, but much better. The next name I will offer, let's talk about Billy Gunn.
Billy Gunn is like Kane, but much worse.
Those of you that are listening to this and not viewing will know that I had a mouthful of cider, and Paul said that, and it nearly went all over the screen. It normally went boom like that.
That's it. That's all you need to say. He really is. Like, Billy Gunn's been the part of some excellent. Let's just repeat what we said about Kane and change the names and not be quite as effusive with our praise, because that's exactly where we are. Billy Gunn's done exactly the same as Kane, but in fact, let's peg him somewhere between Billy Gunn and Kane. Between Buff Bagwell and Kane on that scale.
I think Billy Gunn actually should have been one that we said early on. He could have been our little benchmark.
Could have been above
Billy Gunn, because I would say Billy Gunn. I think you're talking. We're not going to get into Bodacious Bart and that's Bart and Holly anyway. What am I talking about?
Yeah, I was going to say it's not him. Yeah,
you're going to talk about rubbishy ones, but I'm going to say Billy Gunn, Smoking Guns, Outlaws, Billy and Chuck.
Yes,
they are 3 good to great teams. On different levels.
Literally good to great. Smoking Guns being good.
Yeah.
New Age Outlaws being great, and Billy and Chuck being somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, because say what you like about Billy and Chuck, controversial or rubbish or, well, it worked. You still remember them. They felt like a team. They were a good outfit. There's actually a few people.
Good, yeah.
If you go back, Chuck Palumbo, we've not really talked about Chuck Palumbo, neither will we any further, but there's a little group of wrestlers that were around towards the end of WCW. Chuck Palumbo, Sean O'Hare, Mark Jindrak. There's a few of those around that had potential to be on this sort of list, but were only around for 5 minutes, so you can't really do it. But Palumbo would have fit this bracket, wouldn't he, if he'd have been around a little bit longer?
Potentially, but again, he would have been dismissed fairly quickly, but he would have been part of the chat.
But O'Hare and Palumbo are a good team.
Yeah, they were. Yeah. Jindrak and O'Hare were even better, I thought. They did the partner swap, didn't they, between Stasiak and Palumbo and all those guys. But yeah, I think I'm doing Billy Gunn a slight disservice just to try and be amusing, but he was exceptional in the New Age Outlaws. He's a limited wrestler in all facets. He's not that good in the ring, but he's good. He is not that charismatic, but he's got a bit of charisma. Looks fantastic. And I think, obviously, the Road Dogg was the ideal partner for him, and they caught lightning in a bottle. They picked the right characters at the right time when that dickhead, that's what they basically were, weren't they? They were South Park loving. If you met those guys in the street in 1998, they'd have been quoting South Park at you. They'd have been listening to Limp Bizkit and other shit music that was around at the time. They were just, and they'd have probably watched Jackass. They were arseholes, and they were arseholes of that time, and they did a great job of it. But I don't think you look at some of the great teams and the great people we talked about on this list, and Billy Gunn, you just couldn't have that charisma couldn't have that chemistry with other people. I think he had he had some good tag teams, but he had a lot of failed tag teams as well.
There is that,
and I think that really counts against him.
They are the silver tokens in the Crystal Dome in this particular discussion. I think it's also worthy of note that you said about those two being put together at the right time. The South Park loving pair and whatever. Let's not forget that they were Double J, Jesse James, and Rockabilly. That's the reason they were a tag team, and they managed to take themselves down their own route. Okay. Let's try and get something going here. Let's see if you know what I'm going to do. But we're going around about 2009 or so here, and it's this.
Money!
Cider! Money! Cider Money would be your West Country tag team. But for those of you that were watching, I did the whole Beer Money thing there. Beer Money. Bobby Roode and James Storm. I am going to argue that Bobby Roode is the finer of the two for many reasons. But James Storm was in America's Most Wanted, great team. Beer Money, great team. There's been other things that Storm again. Storm is maybe the Palumbo Jindrak. He's never really been at a high enough level to consider for this list because he's just never quite worked at the top level. But I don't think James Storm's got the intangible to get to the top, but in teams, he's absolutely mustard. But I think Roode surpasses him. Bobby Roode in Team Canada. It's still a team. It might be a tag team, but it's a team. Team Canada. Bobby Roode and James Storm for Beer Money. Bobby Roode and Ziggler. Bobby Roode and Austin Aries. Bobby Roode and Chad Gable.
Yeah.
I figure that he probably will come just under the 5. I think there are arguments for people higher than him, only because he's never done it at the top level. But had Bobby Roode signed for WWE in 2004 and not for TNA, I think he'd be a lock for this list. I think because he worked for the underlings for 10 years and then was in NXT for 3 years, Bobby Roode doesn't quite make the top of this list. But I adore Bobby Roode, as you know. And in terms of pure ability, he is as good as anybody on this list.
He's not as good as Cesaro, though, is he?
Okay, he's the second on this list.
And that's what that, and there you go. That's exactly what I was going to say. He, to me, again, fits that same Cesaro mold where you can put him with a lot of people and have put him with a lot of people that have been very good teams. And I agree, he's definitely a really good tag team wrestler. But he's not. We have got to be really strict and really sort of narrowing our criteria now, because there's a lot of excellent nominations on here already, and I'm afraid. Did you say we've got 7 on there now?
We've got 7. We've got 7, and I would have him in the conversation. I'd have him ahead of a couple of you've mentioned, but I absolutely understand where you're coming. He's not done it at a high enough level. I think in terms of quality, he's absolutely in the top 2 or 3. But there are other people where you explain they've done it at this level. They've done it in this company. They've done it on the top of a card. And quite simply, sorry, TNA fans, TNA at its very, very highest is not above WWE mid-card. And it's just hard to, give it, and it's not as big as WCW. It's hard to give the credibility, and neither, quite frankly, is NXT. You've got to be at the very, very top, and quite frankly, Roode isn't quite there. But for quality-wise, I wouldn't have anyone ahead of him, including Cesaro.
What I'll say about Bobby Roode is he could have been on this list. Beer Money are one of the top 10 teams of the last decade, no question about it. And that's the only one where he's been given the chance to let things play out. A lot of these other teams that we've mentioned have been really good, but they've had the rug pulled out of them quite quickly. I absolutely loved the Bobby Roode and Chad Gable team. I thought that the chemistry was fantastic.
Brilliant.
It worked so well together. Same with the Austin Aries team. Same with the Dolph Ziggler team. Thank you. Wine money. If they
cider, wine, money.
If they had leaned into that Ziggler team a bit more, become more of a team rather than just two individuals, had a unified look, they'd have been, and given them time, they could have been one of the greatest tag teams of all time, because there are two individuals. Dolph Ziggler should have been in a tag. Dolph Ziggler should be on this list, but has never been in that position. Dolph Ziggler is the perfect guy who should have been part of a couple or three exceptional teams throughout his career, but that's just never been his path. He would have been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful tag team wrestler. And if they'd have given that team with Bobby Roode 2 years and proper identity as a team, then I think you're talking one of the all-time greatest tag teams. But
Agreed.
It just never happened. So it never, ever happened. So Bobby Roode doesn't come close to this list for me, but I don't think that's his fault.
No, I would agree with all that. I think what I would say for him is that if you flipped this question, I think we've decided, we've come up with our parameters. We know where we are. But if you flipped it and just said it was all on ability as opposed to what they've achieved, like if you tomorrow you were working for WWE and someone came to you and said, I've got this new guy, Paul Benson, right? He's a good wrestler. We want to put him in a tag team to try and get him established with the crowd, like a Chad Gable or whatever. Like, here's someone that we want to get into the swing and tag teaming with someone. Who should we put him with that would be a safe pair of hands, that would help him get over, that would let him, if this new guy Benson become the star, who would we put him with? And I think you'd go, put him with Bobby Roode. I think he'd be your guy. You know what I mean? He'd be your go-to guy. You could put him with Ziggler and you could put him with Cesaro, but I think you'd say safest pair of hands for a new mid-card guy, put him with Bobby Roode. And that's
fair.
It's the kind of, and in terms of not quite achieving stuff, hey, Matt Barber, another one just for you. We love a nice football analogy. Bobby Roode is the Henrik Larsson of professional wrestling. He is, unfortunately, you could argue that AJ Styles is the Henrik Larsson, but they spent their entire career playing for Celtic. And with all due respect to Scottish football, I'm not going to give it any due respect because it's rubbish. And Henrik Larsson spent years scoring 27,000 goals for Celtic every season. And then when he was 34, went to Barcelona. And it's like, that's what's happened with Roode. Roode spent all his best days. Actually, you could argue it with Joe, and you could argue it with AJ, and you could argue it with lots of them. But, they've spent a long time being good for an ordinary club, and then suddenly they need to get to a point, and they're a little bit past it. You could argue that with all three of those, actually, to be fair.
Do you know who else spent the best years of his career with Celtic?
John Hansen?
Shinsuke Nakamura.
There is another. That is true. There is another Shinsuke Nakamura. Spelled ever so slightly differently.
There's one letter different.
Scored a wonderful free kick for Celtic against Manchester United in the Champions League.
There you go.
Yeah, that is true. There is another Shinsuke Nakamura. Right, I have got. Let me see. I think I've got just two names left. Let me just double check. I'm not missing anyone egregiously all the way through my list. I think I've got two names left. Are you happy for me to just fire them out, Paul? Have you got anyone you'd like to bring up?
No, to be honest, there's a couple more, but they should have been brought up in that bunch at the beginning, and I don't really feel like I want to talk about them now. So there's nobody I care about enough to talk about.
Fine. Okay, let's talk about beautiful Bobby Eaton. He might be someone, again, is from a slightly bygone era. He crosses over because you saw him on Nitro, so people would know him from the late 90s or mid to late 90s. A couple of weeks ago, we had a talk about the best wrestlers, non-wrestlers combination, and our winners was the Midnight Express. So people that understand that era of wrestling would know the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette, or the staple of the Midnight Express was beautiful Bobby Eaton, whether it was with Dennis Condrey or whether it was with Stan Lane. But the beauty of Bobby Eaton was he had teams with those. He had teams with the Blue Bloods. He had teams with Arn Anderson. He was your absolute. He was the Bobby Roode of his era, but more so. And he was with a team that drew money all over the country, time and time again with the Midnights, and he did it with other people. I implore you, at the very least, to let us put Bobby Eaton on this long short list.
Oh, unquestionably, he goes on the long short list. I I'm going to get myself in hot water here, but I'm not as big a fan as you. Obviously, the Midnight Express are phenomenal. Like one of the all-time greatest tag teams, and Bobby Eaton was a very, very big part of that. I'm not as big a fan of his other teams. I'm just not. Like Bobby Eaton and Arn Anderson were a good team, but they didn't do much for me. Admittedly, I haven't seen loads of them. And the team with Regal, again, good team, good workers, didn't really achieve much, did they?
No, it's not tippy top. It's not tippy top.
No. And I remember watching before I became, what I'd call a learned wrestling fan, if you like. Basically, what I mean by that is spent all my time geeking out over stuff on the internet. I was not that impressed with that team, and there are other teams, individuals that I knew nothing about at that time either, and they blew me away. But Eaton and Regal together were never that guy. So yeah, I'm totally happy to have him on the list. I'm totally happy to have him on the list, and he's valid. But I don't really feel like I've got much passion for discussion for making a case for him myself.
Okay, well, we'll have a fight about that in a minute. I've got one more name that I want to throw out before we get to the end of this. But can I ask a big favour of you, Paul Benson? Do you think you could do a little bit of plugging over the next 90 seconds or so to talk about our social media channels, other podcasts, the quiz on Sunday, that kind of thing? Because the side has got to me and I need the loo.
Oh, dear. Professionalism is... And that's what I want. Guys, while Rob has a wee break, let me just talk to you about what we'd really love you to be involved in. Anyone who's listening to this, a few of you will already be part of this, but our quiz on a Sunday night, it's our 8 p.m. on Facebook, facebook.com/HookedOnWrestling. We have a great fun hour and a half where we run out 20 questions. Some are really hard, some are really easy, but the best part of it is we just have a laugh and a giggle with everyone who's joining in on the comments. We really make it an interactive, fun way to spend a Sunday night and, just get rid of wash the weekend out, talk wrestling, show off about how much or expose how little we know, and just have a laugh. So it's 8 o'clock every Sunday night on our Facebook page. All you need to do, there's no sign-ups, no fees. Just be on our Facebook page at 8 o'clock or 5-2. We'll explain all the rules. We'll explain how you enter. It's an absolute piece of cake. Anybody who's in the comments now and who's joined in or joins on a regular basis, please do chip in now and plug for us here as well, because we've got a great core of regulars who play week in, week out and have a wonderful time doing it. So that's Sunday nights, 8 p.m. every week. Please join us on Facebook. And as Rob said, you can also find us. We've got our brilliant website, hookedonwrestling.co.uk, where we've got new content every day. Is that all right, Rob? You better now? Fine. Okay.
I'm back.
And then you can also follow us on Twitter at HO_wrestling. So that's the point. I just got that right. Just a good bit of plugging while you were going and relieving yourself. So
there we know. We now know the amount of time Paul Benson needs to plug everything is the time that Rob needs to relieve himself after 4 cans of Thatchers. That's we now know what the timings are. Do you know how they say about boiling an egg? It's the amount of time it takes to listen to, I don't know, All Around the World by Oasis. That's the amount of time to listen to boil an egg. Right. I've got one more name to fire in for you. Before I do, a little bit more for Bobby Eaton. I think Bobby Eaton falls into the category, again, perhaps similar to Bobby Roode, which is, it's not just what they've achieved, but it's just how good they are. He's absolutely flawlessly see-through, Bobby Eaton. Everything he ever did, the charisma is not there. He does not have a charismatic personality. He doesn't walk to the ring and exude manliness and wonderfulness and have a wonderful promo. He doesn't have any of that. But in the ring, bell to bell, he is as solid as you like. He falls into the category of just, I bet he was good when he was 17, and I bet he'd be good when he was 70. Bobby Eaton can just do everything you ask of him in the ring. He can look credible. He can be a babyface. He can be a heel. He can be nasty. He can be defensive. He can be a coward, and he can be a singles or he can be a tag. But I always felt he did bloom as a tag team because he had someone else to do a bit more for him. He was the better wrestler out of him and Dennis Condrey. He was the better wrestler out of him and Stan Lane. But the other two, you could argue, had a little bit more charisma. Certainly Jim Cornette made up for whatever deficiencies. That's why the Midnights and Cornette were such a wonderful blend. But I just feel, again, Eaton falls into that same category as I said with Roode, in the sense that if in 1996 you gave me a wrestler and said, we don't really know what to do with Buff Bagwell or whoever, let's make a tag team, who should we put him with? You'd have gone, bring me Bobby Eaton. And it would have been the perfect person for you.
I again, not to do down Eaton because he doesn't need it. I don't think his range of partners would have been as wide as some of the others we're talking about. So we talked about Cesaro, we talked about Bobby Roode, even Kane to an extent. I think they've got a much wider range of partners that I work with. I think Eaton's partners were from a much more narrow ilk. And I'm being super picky now because we've got a really high bar to set.
But that's our job. You're allowed to be really picky because that's the point of we've got to take 30 or 40 great wrestlers and narrow them down to 5. So that's exactly that's part of the job. What I would also say, I would argue that of all the teams we've talked about, and we've probably mentioned 50 teams tonight, Bobby Eaton was part of a team that was as good and as successful as any of them. You do well to name five teams in history that have been better than the Midnight Express. And, that is a legitimate claim. However anyone else is marketed, the Midnight Express were better and drew more money than the Outlaws. They were better and drew more money than the LOD. They were better and drew more money than the Dudleys. Like, they just were. And it's just it happens to be that they're from an era where anyone under 40 really hasn't seen the best of them. But I do take your point in terms of some of the other people that we've mentioned, that the narrower band for Eaton, I think, is a fair shout.
The other thing to mention about the Midnight Express reputation is history is written by the victors, and they were not on the victorious side of the wrestling war. They personified the South, and the South lost.
I'm not sure Eaton ever worked for Vince. So
exactly. But if they'd have had their success as part of the Titan Empire, then you'd be looking at them as a revered historical team, and
very much so.
And they just don't get the credit they deserve. But to me, Eaton hovers around the bottom end of that top 5 and doesn't quite make it, I don't think. But let's have a look. Let's see.
I will put them on the long short list, and we'll get to them in the end. I've got one more name to mention, and he crosses over with Bobby Eaton. They were tag team partners. Indeed, I believe they were part of the greatest stable that never really got anywhere.
I know exactly who you're talking about.
The Dangerous Alliance is the best ever group of people that never quite got, where they should have been as a group. Everybody individually, mega successful. Do you know the other one, right? Just for 5 minutes in the year 2000 or so, there was a grouping of Edge, Christian, Kurt Angle, and Chris Benoit. Ever so briefly, all under...
Was
it Angle? Was it Angle? It was certainly Edge and Christian and Benoit. There was one other. Shane McMahon had 4 wrestlers.
Oh, he did, didn't he?
It might not have been Kurt.
Was it Big Show?
No, it was after Big Show. It was after Big Show had turned. But there was Shane was aligned with. He was definitely aligned with Edge and Christian and Benoit. And I'm sure there was one more. I thought it might have been Kurt Angle. If anyone's listening and can chip in on that, do so. But just for a tiny, tiny, brief flicker of time, they were like Shane's group. It didn't really come to fruition. Anyway, the Dangerous Alliance. You're talking, I might not remember even everybody, but you're talking Eaton, and you're talking about Arn Anderson, and you're talking about Steve Austin and Rick Rude, and just what an unbelievable... Chris Martin reckons it was a Big Show. Maybe it was a Big Show, but certainly there was that little group of Shanes in 2000. Anyway, the Dangerous Alliance under Paulie Dangerously, a.k.a. Paul Heyman, an unbelievable group that never really grew to fruition. But part of that was a tag team between Bobby Eaton and Arn Anderson, and they were an absolutely fantastic tag team. And here's the thing, not only were they a great tag team, they were probably Arn Anderson's 5th best tag team. If you want to include him and Flair as a team. They weren't a team a lot, but they were certainly a duo. Arn Anderson and Ole Anderson, Arn Anderson and Larry Zbyszko, and of course Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. Arn Anderson was even tag team champions with Paul Roma at one point.
Oh God, yeah.
This is not a list without AA Arn Anderson. And if you listen to the Arn Show as one of Conrad Thompson's podcasts, Arn Anderson will quite frequently tell you he was not one of the great workers of all time. And sometimes people go, Arn Anderson, one of the great workers of all time. He really wasn't. He was decent, and he was no better than decent. But he filled his role impeccably. He was the enforcer. He was the man he professed to be. He was believable, and he worked unbelievably with others. And as Paul said before, for this group of top 5 contenders to really work, you have to look at the difference between Ole Anderson, Tully Blanchard, Larry Zbyszko, Ric Flair, and Bobby Eaton, and Paul Roma. Look at the difference between those 6 people. And you've got 6 almost completely different characters, and they all work with Arn Anderson. Mick Conley points out, didn't he team with Pillman? Yes, he did team with Pillman. When the Horseman was not really a thing, and then it became, because Pillman was a Horseman essentially for short term before he disappeared. At the same time that Benoit joined the Horseman, it was effectively Arn, Flair, Pillman, and Benoit, which might be the most talented iteration of the Horseman. So yes, throw Pillman in there as well. It's an unbelievable litany of people that Arn could work with. You know, there's a reason I left him until last. What a man.
Well, firstly, so we don't have to come back to it later, but I've been on Reddit, and the stable you're talking about was Benoit, Edge Christian, Kurt Angle, and The Big Show.
Okay, it's all 5.
All of them.
Yeah.
And apparently they were loosely called The Conspiracy.
Well, I've never heard that before, but okay. But
neither have I, but apparently that's there. So anyway, back to Arn Anderson. I have to set my biases aside on this one a bit. Arn Anderson has never done all that much for me. As an individual wrestler, as a talent, as someone I'd like to watch, have I ever gone out of my way to watch an Arn Anderson match? The answer is no. There's not one single Arn Anderson match I've ever said, "Ooh, I must go back and watch this," or "I must, back in there, I must make sure I watch this." So I am not a huge Arn Anderson fan by any means. I think he's a good mechanic, but I think he was a good mechanic with better marketing. I think he was held in such high esteem because the greatest wrestler of all time told everyone how good he was. And I think that really, really helped his reputation. That is not to do with this. He seems like a wonderful bloke, a student of the game, and a great, servant to the world of wrestling. But I think a lot of it, if him and Flair had never been friends, would Arn Anderson's name stand the test of time? I'm not so sure it would. And there's no way of arguing that's right or wrong.
I'm not sure that's fair. I'm not sure that's a fair point to bring up.
Well, it's leading to something.
Okay.
But the point is, you can't argue that for or against, because it's a nebulous opinion there's no base in reality. Just a thought. That said, Arn Anderson as a tag team wrestler was exceptional. Exceptional. For some reason, and this is why I argued it. He argued he should be. We're going to talk about the finalists soon, but he definitely needs to be on our long list because he just worked in a tag team. I said earlier, I love tag team wrestling. I love it more than singles wrestling, and a lot of that is the ingenuity of teams and the way they can tell more stories with the guys in the ring. Primarily, the story of heels cheating and using the numbers advantage to their advantage. And Arn Anderson just felt like a guy who. And I hate this phrase, and I'm not going to use this phrase, but that modern saying about how while everyone else is playing checkers, you're playing chess. Well, it's such an overused, cliched pile of nonsense. But Arn Anderson was a chess
mainly
master.
because it's drafts and not checkers. But okay, but
there you go. Arn Anderson was a chess master. What I loved about Arn Anderson's teams were that whether it was him or both of the guys in the team, they were always one step ahead, or felt like they were outthinking their opposition, and I love that in a heel team. I love the fact that we're not the better guys, because the heels have tended to you portray yourselves as lesser than the baby faces, but nobody outthought Arn Anderson. in kayfabe terms. As a tag team general, if you said, you need a captain of your team, like if you were putting the Ultimate Survivor Series team together of heels, Arn Anderson's your captain, because nobody strategizes in the ring better than he does. And I'm talking obviously kayfabe here.
Yeah,
and he could have done all sorts with all sorts of people. And I actually disagree with you on the breadth of his partners. I don't think they were all massively different.
Really?
Personality wise, yes, they were.
You don't think Ole and Tully are different? You don't think Zbyszko and Eaton are different? And then throw in Flair around all of them?
Well, not really. Like I say, personality wise, who they were outside the rings and characters they were, but in terms of what's in the ring, it's fairly similar.
No, it's not. It just isn't. It just isn't. You cannot. Okay, Zbyszko and Flair, I'll give you, are the same sort of I'm the man sort of thing. But Tully wasn't the same as Flair. They were part of the Horsemen, but they're not similar. They're cocky, but they're not similar. They're not the same sort of wrestler. They're not the same sort of character.
Okay.
Eaton's totally different, and Ole's a big old grizzly bastard. They're not similar.
Fair. Okay. Well, look, I'll stand down on that one. To be fair,
bless you.
But I don't.
Fight me.
Only because I haven't got the argument to back it up, and I know when I haven't quite got the argument to back it up.
And it's 9:10.
But anyway, long story short, I think Arn Anderson's a wonderful tag team wrestler, but overrated as a talent.
I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that. But I think he would tell you that.
Fair enough. And I know what I would say.
Agree with you.
What I would say is that qualifies him more than anyone to be on the list. Yeah, because as a singles guy, totally put him in any sort of team, wonderful.
That's exactly it. I think that's where this whole discussion is coming from. There's also one other thing we haven't mentioned as far as Arn, and it has to be factored in because we talked about tag team wrestling. We didn't say 2-on-2 tag team wrestling. We talked about tag team wrestling, and who has been better in War Games than Arn Anderson?
Yeah, fair point.
When you're talking War Games, listen, I'm not a War Games fan, but it was the staple of NWA, Jim Crockett Promotions, WCW, and it was almost always the Four Horsemen, against a combination of, Dusty and Nikita and the Steiners or LOD or, whoever. But you threw out the Horsemen, and who often went out first or second, and they normally won the flip of the coin, didn't they? So they were always going out first. Who did you send out first or second? Arn Anderson. He was the glue that held War Games together, and that's a tag team enterprise.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I agree. I would, I think we're at the end of our list. Just really quickly before we discuss the 5, is there anyone? Because I'm thinking 2 names now, and I've been prompted to say this by your mention of War Games. Who's out there currently that if we had this conversation in 10 years' time would be on the list? I'm going to give you 2 names.
Okay.
2 names. And they've teamed together, actually, both in NXT. Roderick Strong, but more so Pete Dunne. To me,
Pete Dunne is a fabulous shout. I've never been a big Roderick Strong guy. To me, Roderick Strong is the Dean Malenko of this era. He's a perfectly acceptable, believable, strong wrestler. But I have no desire to watch Roderick. I don't care if Roderick Strong wins or loses. I have nothing. Okay. I have no interest in Roderick Strong whatsoever.
Fine.
He's a good wrestler,
but as part of the group,
very capable. He is the 4th best out of the group that he's in, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
My issue. We can have another 2 hours on the Undisputed Era. Who I think all 4 of them are great. I think all 4 of them play their role. But I think Adam Cole is a babyface, and I think Kyle O'Reilly is an unbelievable heel. They shouldn't be in the same group. Long other discussion. But Pete Dunne, yes, great shout.
Because
there is something missing with Pete Dunne. There is something that means he's never going to be WWE Universal Champion. But
not only that, but do you know what Pete Dunne does for me? Pete Dunne brings out the best in others. And the one that prompted me is Matt Riddle, right? I never quite got Matt Riddle. Never quite saw it. Everyone raved about him to the point where, sometimes when you're wrong, it's you rather than somebody else. And that was me with Matt Riddle. I knew that I was wrong. I knew there was something there. I just couldn't see it. The moment he started teaming with Pete Dunne, I saw it straight. Pete Dunne is going to be the guy. If he goes this route, Pete Dunne could be the guy. He could be the Bobby Roode. He could be the Cesaro. He could be the Arn Anderson. He will bring out the absolute best. He could be the greatest straight man in the history of wrestling if he goes that route. He will bring 100%. Out the best in everybody he plays with, and he will he will magnify those personalities and bring out the best aspects of those personalities. I really hope Pete Dunne could be a great singles wrestler, but he can be an all-time phenomenal legend as a tag team wrestler.
Yeah, absolutely 100%. That is a really, really, really strong shout. There's a few other people that we haven't mentioned that we could have mentioned along the way. I feel like we could have talked about either or both of Chris Daniels and Kazarian. For the roles that they perform within their particular teams. And again, sometimes as part of a group, I think one of the strongest factions in TNA history was the group that was essentially Fortune, that morphed a couple of times because it had 4 or 5 or 6 different people in it. But, that was a good group, and all of the people that contributed to that. I wouldn't have said Bob Holly was a million miles away from having a bit of a conversation. Sean Waltman, ditto, teamed together, had other decent teams. There's other people that we've missed off along the way here, but in terms of the future, hell of a shout. I mean, that is. I hope for Pete Dunne's sake he has an even better career than that. But I think if in 10 years' time we're talking about Pete Dunne being one of the all-time great tag wrestlers. Because here's the thing, folks, not everyone can be a main eventer. If you have in your career, if you aspire to be a wrestler and in your career you're Lance Storm, you've had a great career. Right?
Well, Lance Storm's one of the ones I wanted to talk about. And not enough to carry on this conversation, but him and Chris Martin in the comments have just mentioned one other as well. He's mentioned Rick Martel and Tito Santana. Certainly Tito Santana was one that I we've gone past it now. We need to narrow down this list, but yeah, I think there's we could have had 3 or 4 conversations on this. There's so much depth.
Yeah, and if we've missed anyone off, folks, it's not because we hate them, and it might be because they've just sort of skipped our mind. But if they have skipped our mind, there's a reason they've skipped our mind, because they haven't quite hit to the heady heights. Right, we've got 9 names, Paul.
Remind me. I need to write these down.
They are in the order I wrote them down. So these are not necessarily the order I think of them. They're not necessarily in alphabetical order or in year order. They are simply the order in which we spoke about them and what we have come up with. We have Owen Hart, Eddie Guerrero, Edge, Kofi Kingston, Terry Gordy, Cesaro, Kane, Bobby Eaton, and Arn Anderson. I'll say them again. Owen Hart, Eddie Guerrero, Edge, Kofi Kingston, Terry Gordy, Antonio Cesaro, or Cesaro, I should say, Kane, Bobby Eaton, and Arn Anderson. What say you, Paul Benson, that you come up with 5, I'll come up with 5 as our top 5s, right? And if we agree on people, they're in automatically, and then we'll fight over the others. What do you think about that?
Perfect.
Well, I have a 5. While Paul is trying to do his 5, because I've rather thrown that on him. I'm not quite sure what he plugged while I was off, just making myself feel more comfortable. But I will say Sunday, we're really looking forward to Sunday. Sunday is always a fun night of the week. Sunday is our quiz night live here on YouTube Live and Facebook Live, 8 p.m. on Sunday. Did you say, or am I allowed to say what there might be on Sunday? Have you already said it?
No, don't mention it yet because I've got to get final sign off. So no, don't mention it. But might be something cool on Sunday. Might be the week after. That's all I'm allowed to say. Well, it might be coming. It'll be something cool every Sunday. It's not just a one-off.
No, I know it's going to be regular, but I'm saying that we don't know when it's going to start. But,
gotcha. I've got my 5, by the way.
We are working on something that will make your Sundays even better. That's all we're saying. And are we going to do our little Extreme Rules preview this week? Are we going to do 8 till 10 this week? So we're doing
We absolutely will. I'm going to stay up. I'm off work next week. I'm on holiday next week, so I'm going to stay up for Extreme Rules.
Okay. So anyway, as far as Sunday goes, we will be on from 8 till 10. The quiz normally lasts until around about 9:30, but we'll stick around until 10 o'clock to do a little bit of an Extreme Rules horror show chat. And there may or may not be a few Extreme Rules or extreme themed things in the quiz. We will see. Anyway, I've got my 5. Have you got your 5, Paul Benson?
I've got my 5. So why don't you just go through the 9? Tell me whether you've got them, and I'll tell you whether I've got them.
Okay, the 9 that we have are Owen Hart.
These are your 5, are they?
No.
All right, okay.
You said the 9 again.
Sorry.
I thought you were going to go
Owen,
yes or no.
Sorry, no. I've written down different order. That's all. Sorry.
Okay.
Owen Hart is a no, actually.
Okay. Let's change this. Give me your 5.
Okay. Edge. Eddie Guerrero. Kofi Kingston. Cesaro and Kane.
Okay. How many of your 5 do you think I have in my 5?
Like 1.
I've got 2 of your 5. Right. So into the final 5 go Edge and Cesaro. Okay. I have it. I have Edge and Cesaro, and you have Edge and Cesaro. So they are locks. Now we need to do the ones that didn't go in either of ours, right?
Tell me who you haven't got in yours that I didn't. So the ones I haven't got are Owen Hart, Terry Gordy, Bobby Eaton, and Arn Anderson. So by the process of elimination, the only one you haven't got is Owen Hart.
Owen is not in my list.
So Owen's a goner. So
Bobby, neither of us said Owen, yeah?
Neither of us said Owen, so he's out, sadly. And then that's really funny, actually, because I nearly put Owen in instead of Edge, so we nearly only had 1.
Okay, I was fairly certain on Edge from a long way out. So, okay, so my other 3, we've both agreed on Edge and Cesaro. My other 3 are Arn Anderson, Terry Gordy, and Bobby Eaton.
Okay, so Edge and Cesaro are locked. They are in the 5. Okay, so we basically need to so we've got Eddie, Kofi, Kane, Eaton, Arn, and Gordy. Right, so here's the fair thing. What we're going to do. You're going to pick one of your 3. I'm going to pick one of my 3. And then we're going to argue over the last one.
Okay.
So you go first. Pick one of your 3. Pick your absolute lock that you cannot have this conversation without.
Right, I know he's not going to get votes from the people when he gets to the vote, but I absolutely think this list deserves Terry Gordy.
Okay, so Terry Gordy is in. I'm trying to take this as slowly as possible because I absolutely cannot decide between these 3. But if I look at it objectively, I know who I want to pick, and I want to pick Kofi, but I'm picking Kane.
I would pick Kane out of your 3.
I'm picking Kane because he needs to be there.
Before you decided to do it this way round, I was going to say I'll pick one of yours and you pick one of mine, right? And I would have picked Kane. Of your 3, I would have picked Kane.
Okay, I probably would have picked Arn Anderson off yours, but anyway, we've got 1 spot left. So what we're going to do is we're going to tournament this, mate. So you pick one of your 2, I'll pick one of my 2, and then we'll have an argument.
Those of you that are in the room as well, fire your opinions at us as well. We've got 4 left. We've got Arn Anderson, Bobby Eaton, Kofi Kingston, and Eddie Guerrero. Not Eddie Kingston, and he said Eddie Kingston. He doesn't quite fit into this list. But he's good, but he's not on this list. So Arn, Bobby Eaton, Kofi Kingston, Eddie Guerrero. Oh, I see. I wanted to say Bobby Roode as well, but I accept that he's not quite on the list.
Well, I'm gonna make my choice really easily. And as much as I love and wanted to advocate for Eddie Guerrero, if I'm literally putting him up on a 1-on-1 shout against Kofi Kingston, Kofi wins. In terms of tag team wrestlers, it's Kofi all the way.
Okay,
so
well,
Kofi's my nomination.
And listen, Arn Anderson is above Bobby Eaton. And, right. I love Bobby Eaton, and I cannot believe he's not in this top 5. But because I'd have Bobby Eaton. Well, I don't know. I mean, I had a 5, and I'd have all of my 5 ahead of all of your 5 because that's the nature of the beast. So I can't believe that Eaton's not in the list, but Arn is above him. So it's Arn Anderson versus Kofi Kingston.
Right. Okay. So why don't we open this up to the people in the chat? Let's reward them for sticking with us for 2 hours.
Yeah. Okay.
And let's also take the argument out of ours.
It's been pretty close though, because of the people that comment in. Leanne says Kofi edges it. Chris Marden Arn for me. Francis says Arn and Kofi. To be fair to him, he said that before we narrowed it down. Mick Connolly goes for Arn Anderson. It's ever so slightly Arn over Kofi, but I mean, it's negligible. It's negligible. Well, it's really close.
If it's a draw, we're putting them both in and making it a 6. But
we've never done that before. We've never broken ranks. We've always been fierce and stuck to our guns and gone for
guys,
5.
Well, let's see then, guys. Stick it in your comments. Tell us who you want to see in there. Do you want to see the final spot be taken up by Arn Anderson or Kofi Kingston? Who is the best tag team wrestler of the two? Who has been the most influential, the most successful?
Should we pitch for R2 in the mold of the Great Britain's debate when Jeremy Clarkson defended Isambard Kingdom Brunel and so on and so forth?
All right, you've got 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay. Arn Anderson has the
litany. Stop.
We put an actual clock. We put an actual clock on it.
Yep, you've got 30 seconds, and I'm going to stop you. Ready, steady, go.
Arn Anderson is a wrestler that epitomizes what we are talking about. He doesn't stand out as an individual, but as a tag team, he betters anyone he's with. It's Flair, it's Tully, it's Ole, it's Eaton, it's so many different people. He embellishes what he's about. Kofi's been there. He's been to the dance. He's been there. He's won the title. And how many other teams other than New Day is Kofi about? It's a couple that have been short-term. Arn Anderson for life. For the development of everybody, Arn Anderson is above Kofi Kingston.
Okay. Right, so that's your 30 seconds. Do you want to time me? So
no.
You'll
know roughly. I'll just tell you to shut up when I'm fed up of listening.
Kofi Kingston is the absolute epitome of tag team wrestling. He is the man that makes everybody else around him better. There is nobody better at bringing that sympathy on, for bringing his partner in. He can merge well with anyone. He's part of the greatest tag team combination of all time. Kofi Kingston is not only that, but great at garnering sympathy and likability. He's never going to be a great heel, just as Arn Anderson's never going to be a great babyface. He is just Mr. Tag Team Wrestling. My cat's just chipped me up by jumping in my Box of Undertaker t-shirt. Right on the 30-second mark.
I think I win because of that, don't I? What I will say, in absolute fairness, by point of discussion, I think that Kofi Kingston and Bobby Eaton are quite similar in the sense that you say Midnight Express, New Day, absolutely top draw, right up there, right as high as you can get in the tag team ranks, okay? But after that, do me number 2 and 3 for Kofi. What's his second and third team?
Just give us your votes, guys. Let's see. What do you want, Kofi?
No, I mean, in absolute seriousness, what's your second and third for Kofi?
There isn't, mate. There isn't
because after the New Day, you know, it's Evan Bourne, it's R-Truth, and it's CM Punk, and it's like, well,
Kofi Kingston's the exception. We talked about right at the start.
But what you took away from me is you said basically, and you were right in saying that Bobby Eaton, because he wasn't with Arn long enough, and because the Blue Bloods weren't high enough, you know, that I can't have Bobby Eaton because there's not enough really other than the Midnights. Well, I don't think after Kofi there's too much after the New Day, but with Arn you've got Ole and you've got Tully and you've got Zbyszko and you've got Eaton and you've got Flair and you've got Roma, and I just think there's so much there, as well as the War Game stuff. That's my push for Arn. I can't see this 5 without Arn.
You're absolutely right, but I would say that the New Day is so much more accomplished than anything Arn has ever done. So again, it comes down to that: is it one all-time legendary team, or is it a multiple very good teams?
No, I think it's multiple. I think it's multiple because I think that I don't think Kofi is the man in those teams. I think that think that it's a lot to do with the other two as well.
As far as I can see it, we've had 2 votes for Kofi so far and 1 vote for Arn Anderson. Chris Hatcher said Arn Anderson.
Behave. For Arn Anderson.
Where? Sorry, I can't
Chris
see
Marden
those.
says Arn Anderson. Mick Connolly, Arn Anderson. Chris Hatch, Arn Anderson.
Sorry, Mick All right. Okay. Sorry. No. I stand corrected. I didn't see Chris and Mix.
Yeah.
So it's 3-2 to Arn Anderson as we speak. So
I
we're going to give it.
No, I think it's 3-3. Kofi. Francis says Kofi. Graham says Kofi. Leanne says Kofi. Chris says Arn. Chris Hatch says Arn. And Mick Conley says Arn. It's 3. As far as those votes go, it's 3-3.
Right.
Chris Martin says, controversial opinion, New Day are annoying. Mick Conley, how can you say New Day are more established than the Horsemen? Good point. Well,
you tell me one.
Both on, aren't we? We're going to have to put them both on.
We're putting them both on. We're going to 6. We're going to 6 because we're running out of time and patience.
Should we just get rid of Kane? Should we put Arn and Kofi on and get rid of Kane?
No, we should not. Well, we can get rid of Terry Gordy if you like.
Referee's decision is final. Mick Conley says. Yes, Chris Hatch says Arn Anderson.
Not Chris Hatch has no jurisdiction on this podcast this week, I'm afraid. So he is a zebra without his stripes. We're putting 6 on. We'll go for 6. I think it's the only fair way if we want to get off this podcast without completely screwing up the ending. So our 6 are Edge, Cesaro, Terry Gordy, Kane, Kofi Kingston, and Arn Anderson.
Okay, fine. Yeah, let's break the rules just because you can't listen to, a reasoned opinion. Looking at history, who thinks Kofi Kingston above Arn Anderson when it comes to tag team wrestling? Nobody.
Well, at least 3 people. At least 3 people in the comments, and me. And bear in mind, Rob, we've got to stop this podcast before your light disappears because once again you've been too tight to put 50p in the meter.
I am getting it's a bit, as we say in our part of the world, it's getting a bit dimpsy, as we say down in Devon. Getting a bit dimpsy, and it's getting a bit dark. But
and you trust the opinion of anyone that says that?
Great word, Dimpsey. Gene Dimpsey. Listen, we will have missed off people as well. Who said earlier on? I saw someone earlier on say, "Can't believe you've not discussed Scott Steiner in more depth." There will be others that we've not gone into too much detail with. It's just the way it goes, folks. It's a massive list. And if this is proving nothing else, this podcast, week after week after week, we always talk about it's wrestling. You enjoy it. It's our catchline. It's our slogan. But when we find these topics and we go into depth of them, we find so much depth. We realize there's so much worth enjoying. There's so much worth, going into. Who else haven't we mentioned? We haven't mentioned Jim Brunzell. We could have mentioned the Killer Bees and the High Flyers. There's so many people that we could have gone into, and it's just the way things fall. But it's been a spirited argument. Paul has broken the rules, but we will go with those rules. I cannot wait to find out next week when we do the actual tally how many more votes Arn Anderson gets than Kofi Kingston. But to be fair, I put Terry Gordy on the list, which is a correct thing to do, and Terry Gordy won't get any votes whatsoever because the people that vote will all be under 40. So there we go. So our final list for the first time ever. This is podcast number 11, I believe, of the series of How to Be Great, and we are finally breaking protocol. So we've managed to get into 5 every other week. But today, in the order in which we put it in, we are saying Edge, Cesaro, Terry Gordy, Kane, Arn Anderson, and Kofi Kingston. They are the final 6. They will go through. It's the first time that we have a final 6 that go into your vote. So please, everyone. And by the way, I'm not saying go and vote for Arn Anderson, folks. I'm not saying he's my number 1 choice because clearly I put other people in front of him, Paul put other people in front of him, and indeed Kofi. But vote for who you think is the right person to vote for. Is it Edge? Is it Cesaro? Is it Gordy, Kane, Anderson, or Kingston? Paul, where can they vote?
They can vote at hookedonwrestling.co.uk/vote. And we're recording this for the benefit of those that are watching live. We're recording this on Wednesday night. We will put the poll up first thing Thursday morning. For those that are listening on delay, the poll is live now until, what's the date next Monday? The 20th, until the midnight on the 20th of July.
Yeah, each week the poll runs out basically when Raw starts. That's essentially
Correct.
the rule. We put the poll up as soon as we can at the end of the podcast. As Paul said, it'll be if you're looking at sort of midday Thursday, that's probably your rough line for when the poll will be live, and then it'll be live from then until just before Raw starts on Monday night / Tuesday morning, as far as we are concerned. Phew, that was an epic debate, but what a great topic! I have thoroughly enjoyed. I mean, I think I say this every week. I've enjoyed every topic we've come up with. But some more than others. That was a belter. There was so much depth. I mean, honestly, if we'd have come up with a top 5 of Owen Hart, Eddie Guerrero, Booker T, Ray Stevens, and Bobby Roode, that's a good 5.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we didn't include any of those. So, and as Mick has just said, what about Shawn Michaels? I think, as far as Shawn goes, you only really consider Shawn with the Rockers. Might as he had short-term tag teams with, John Cena or Steve Austin or Kevin Nash or whoever else. You don't really consider him as a tag wrestler. So there's lots of reasons we could all fall out about this. By the way, tell us we're wrong. Start a Facebook. We'll put a Facebook comment together when we tell you where you can vote. Tell us we're wrong in there, and we'll start another discussion. I'm more than happy to weigh in again. But it's been a fun couple of hours. We hope you've all enjoyed. We're going to do these occasionally live. We're not going to make it live every week because, quite frankly, sometimes Paul and I need to record it at quite short notice at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning or whatever it might be. So that's the way it goes.
I work at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, Rob.
Sometimes you start work. No, you're so dedicated. Sometimes you start work at 7 in the morning, work till 11, take your hour lunch break to record the podcast, and start back again from 12 until about 9 at night. So I know how dedicated you are.
In all seriousness, you're thinking, I for 6 weeks, I had Tuesdays off during the whole lockdown period, making up for holidays and stuff. And that was when I was recording it. And I'm saying this because my boss genuinely does listen to this. He's a big wrestling fan. And that's true. If you're listening, Martin.
But he can laugh all he wants. I'm not even bullshitting. The amount of times I have rung Paul at 8 o'clock at night. Oh, are you looking forward to the pay-per-view at the weekend? He goes, mate, I'm working. So I don't care what he says. The amount of times I try and ring him at stupid hours and he's still bloody working and I can't get hold of him. So he works perfectly fine hours. So we're not getting into that debate. Mick Conley says, I can't believe you can get through anything in an hour. He's got a point.
Yeah, he's right. He's absolutely right.
So what we'll do is, as Chris Marden quite rightly says, we'll do this sporadically, and we'll
once a month, maybe
once a month or so when we think we've got a good topic.
Yeah,
we'll fire one out live. But we are here every week, so please join us every week on YouTube and on all of your podcast providers, including Spotify, and you can watch it or listen to it through hookedonwrestling.co.uk/podcasts, where you'll find not only us, but several other excellent podcasts which are out there for you. And I want a little nod to the Seconds Away podcast this week, which is a British wrestling podcast, which had Mark Haskins on this week. And I love Mark Haskins, great wrestler, lovely fella, nice family, and it'll be really interesting. I actually haven't listened yet, but it's on. I've already downloaded it to listen on one of my walks later on in the week, because I'm really looking forward to hearing what Mark's got to say, because I'm a big Mark Haskins fan. We will be back next week with another one of these. We will let you know the topic of next week's podcast over the weekend. It's another good reason to tune into the quiz. We often drop what the topic for the podcast is going to be during the quiz. That will be on 8 o'clock on Sunday night. So unless he interrupts me and has anything to say in the wrap-up, that is it from Showbiz Paul Benson and indeed from me, Rob McNichol, on the How to Be Great podcast. Please tune in again next week. But before that, all we can say really is don't forget, this is wrestling, so enjoy it. We'll see you very soon.